We now know all the details of the brand new Renault Zoe that's going to come to the market later this year. And I'm adamant that with the advent of that and a number of other vehicles coming, that the second-hand market is going to start to get more cars in it, and therefore that demand is going to start to be met. With the demand being met, we can assume that the prices are actually going to start going down, which is why I wanted to have a look back at this, a 2015 22 kilowatt hour Renault Zoe, and see whether this potentially could be an absolute bargain. This video is sponsored by Just EVs, a great family-run company with the largest selection of battery electric vehicles available with free and immediate UK delivery. Have a look at justevs.co.uk or click the link below. And don't forget to mention EV Opinion for a free annual service. One of the great things for me about buying a used car is that your money goes an awful lot further. You can look at buying something that's got an awful lot more equipment in than you could if you were buying it new. So this, for example, it's a dynamic intense. It means it comes with the comfort pack and the easy pack. So you get things like auto wipers, auto lights, electric windows in the back. You get all sorts of additional features that perhaps you wouldn't have been able to consider if you had bought it new. And the other great thing about buying used is, of course, you've got hindsight. You're able to see which models, which years were the best ones. You know, at this stage, at 2015, this Zoe has been about for a few years. Those little evolutions to make it work properly, the recalls, they've pretty much happened by this point. And they're looking actually in 2015 at moving on to the next version. So what you're going to get is a car that, well, it's at the peak of where it should be. So what you should get is a really, really nice car that's been really well made, and you shouldn't have any concerns about it at this point. And before we start looking around the car, it's important to tell you that this is a leased battery option. 2015, later on in that year, they started to make the battery-owned ones available. You'll see if there's an eye on the back of it, that means the battery is owned. This one's leased, and of course, depending on the mileage you do, that depends on how much you pay every month for your battery lease. Personally speaking, I'm not a massive fan of that. I'm confident in the battery technology and I'm happy that they're going to last. I don't really want to be paying an extra amount every month, but that's not to say that it doesn't work for everyone. The amount of people that have bought these cars with battery leases on suggests that, well, they can't be wrong. They must be right for some people. And that peace of mind that if your battery, your state of health ever drops off and they'll just replace it, you've got breakdown cover, there's things in there that clearly appeal to people. But let's have a look around it, and let's start with the side, and let's be honest, the side is nothing really exciting. It looks all right. Let's not dwell on it. There's nothing wrong with the side. Let's go to the front, where I think it's a bit more interesting. We've seen on the new Zoe that's just been launched, a whole new front design of it, and I said it didn't look dramatically different. They've got LED lights and things in them now, but ultimately, it looks very similar, and I think that's one of the great things about this Zoe, and I think it's the reason why they haven't changed it much. It's got quite a timeless shape and look to it. I think if you look at some of the other cars, for example, a Ford Puma, I don't think that car is ever really dated. It's just stayed looking a great car. You put a private plate on it, nobody would ever know the age of it, and I think the Zoe is exactly like that. And although it's not ultra modern, it's not ultra flash, I think, again, if you don't tell anyone how old it is, they wouldn't be able to guess that this is a nearly 5-year-old car now. The one feature I think it's worth talking about at the front here is under this Renault badge here is our charging, and it comes with this chameleon charger. Ultimately, if you look at it, it just looks like a Type 2 charger. But that can go from your trickle charging with your granny charger, which granny chargers don't come as standard with these cars. You have to buy them extra, so if you find one with one, that's a little bonus. And it will go all the way up to rapid charging. But the great thing with these is if you're able to find somewhere with 3-phase charging, maybe at work, here in the UK it's not standard, of course, in residential homes, but if you can, this will charge at 22 kilowatts, which is a charge speed that we don't see on any other electric vehicle. And at the back, well, it's pretty uneventful. The lights I like, they're quite interesting at night. You get a nice pattern with the lights. The boot itself, when we open it up, it's for the size of car, I have to say, it's not a bad sized boot. It's quite deep, which is great. One criticism is the seats, when they fold down, they're not 60-40 splits. The whole back seat goes down. So if you had somebody in the back, they'd have to get out if you wanted to drop the seats. And there is a bit of a lump when you drop the seats between the boot and the rest of it. But on the whole, I have to say, that's not a bad sized boot at all. And so to the drive, and the first thing I noticed as soon as I got in here was just how you're perched on this seat. There's no adjustments to move it up or down, you're just sat on top of the seat. You may or may not like that, I don't know, but for me it just feels a bit uneasy, because what you've effectively got here is a really nice handling car. I mean, what's to go wrong with it? It's a short, squat car with lots of low down weight from that battery and a wheel in each corner, so it's going to handle really, really well. But the seating position doesn't flatter it. It doesn't make it feel as if it's as good as it actually is. And the other thing I notice, especially coming from a Leaf, is the lack of regen when you lift your foot off the accelerator. That's not to say it hasn't got any, because the way it works in this car is through the foot brake. As soon as I start applying the first part of that brake, it doesn't actually bind the pads to the discs. What it does is it engages the regen, and you can feel the car slowing down. And the more you press down on the brake pedal, the more you will go towards those pads closing in on the discs, and it will engage the brakes then. It's a different way of driving. It's probably a more natural way of engaging regen for somebody that's perhaps new to electric vehicles. Personally, I do like, as soon as I lift off, that almost one pedal driving they talk about. I enjoy that, but this does work, and it could be a good way into something that you're not really used to. Noise wise, well, I've got to say it's pretty good. I'm doing 60 mile an hour. There's not an awful lot of wind noise. There's a few little creaks and rattles, which I suppose on one hand you've got to accept for a car that's getting on a little bit, but I would suggest there's more in here than my Leaf, which is exactly the same age. I think that build quality, it's just showing that it's not quite up there with the Nissan. But bear in mind, this is a cheaper car, so you're not paying anywhere near as much. You've got to give it a little bit of leeway for that, I think. Let's talk some facts and figures then. We've got a 22 kilowatt hour battery driving a 66 kilowatt motor. That gives us 88 horsepower and gets us from 0 to 60 in about 13.5 seconds with a top speed of 84 mile an hour. Now, there's nothing there really overly exciting, but if you put that together as a package, actually being in this car, it feels like quite a nippy little car. And range wise, well, you can, if you're careful and you drive this around the town a lot, I would suggest you can expect 70 miles to a charge. Of course, when you get out on the roads, it does start to drop, so probably more like 60. And if you're very heavy with your right foot, it's going to go down even more. But if you work out your figures between 60 and 70 miles per charge, I don't think you'll be far wrong. Inside the Zoe, I think we get more of the same feeling. It's a car that is advanced for its years. It feels more modern than it should have been back in 2015. Now, before we start looking at the individual components, let me just talk about the quality of the materials and the build quality in here. This is a Renault. You effectively get what you pay for, let's be honest, and there's nothing wrong with it, but the materials used in here are certainly anything but premium. They are adequate for what you pay for a car of this level. That's probably the fairest way of describing it. And because of that, what you start to find is the older they get, the tireder they look and feel. You do start to get a few little rattles, you do start to get a little bit of, some of the areas start to peel away maybe, or just not feel as tight as they would have done when they were new. So don't expect to be buying a cheap, second-hand, immaculate Renault Zoe, because if you find one that is as good as it was the day it came out of the factory, I think, well, I'd be concerned. I think maybe something had happened to it. But let's have a look around here and let's see what we're missing in here, because on first glance, I don't think we're missing anything. I think everything we need is here. Our driving position, it's typical Renault. It's you sit, I always feel in a Renault, you sit on the seats, you don't really sink into them, but you know, they're comfortable enough. And the steering wheel, I think, is always just tilted a little bit further forward than I would want it to be. You can move it up and down, but you can't move it in and out. Display in front of me, again, for 2015, that was really modern and advanced. It's starting to look a little bit dated now. It changes the colours as you're driving more economically, but it's got all the information there you need, and you can customise it to an extent. The 7-inch touchscreen, it's got everything on there I need. It looks okay. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing overly flash. It's got the information I need on there. You can, of course, connect via Bluetooth, via USB. You can put an SD card in here with some of your media on there. So connectivity is, everything's there. Everything's on that screen for you to see. It's done nicely. It's done easily. I've jumped in here having only ever really spent any time in a Zoe on one other occasion, and I found it easy to use. A little bit of this piano black shiny plastic stuff, not too much, not enough to annoy me, but enough that you're going to have to probably carry a microfiber cloth in there just to give it a dust down every so often and keep it looking clean and tidy. We've got our climate control. We've got what looks like an auto box here, so you have to pull the lever in order to move it up and down to engage the gear you want to be in. Eco button, something that we can use, and what it does is it limits your use of things like the air conditioning in order to eke out a bit more range. It takes some of the power away. If you're wanting to get as much mileage out as possible, you're going to engage eco. We've got cruise control, which is, for a small city car, that's always a nice feature because it's not something you're going to use every day, but it is great when you're able to use it. And then we've got this middle bit here with an old manual style handbrake and some cup holders and bits and pieces. And I've got to be honest, if I show you my water bottle, it doesn't fit in any of those. They're pretty useless unless you've got yourself a little coffee cup, in which case they're probably not deep enough. So not a great design feature there. But as I said, it still looks quite modern. The materials aren't great, but there's nothing wrong with this for the price of this car. Let's see what it's like in the back. It's back here that actually this car has really surprised me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not going to try and tell you that this has got acres of space, because it hasn't. It's a small car, it's a city car, it's not designed to be driven miles with lots of people in the back. But considering the size of it, they've actually made really good use of the space back here. This is in my driving position, I'm 5'9", and I've got as much room as I have in some bigger cars. My toes are a little bit tucked under, but I do feel like I've got room. Yes, it's a bench seat. Yes, there's not masses of support, but I'm comfortable here. The one thing I do notice is if I sit up, again, 5'9" is not particularly tall. My head is touching the roof here, which isn't brilliant. And it's back here you can really see where Renault have decided that they're going to make some bits look a bit more expensive at the detriment of some other bits. So we see this quite cheap plastic looking door panel here, but then the seat, the cover that goes on the seat back here, it looks quite premium. It looks quite a nice cover. And I think that's what they do around this car. They put flashes of these nicer looking things to make you think that this car is a better, more expensive car than it actually is. And one of the other things back here that I think they've done really well when you compare it to something like the Leaf is that they've tried to keep the floor as flat as possible. So we've got a little hump here, but it's not too bad. That means that you could actually sit an adult in the middle. It wouldn't be overly comfortable, especially if there's three of you, but even a sort of a larger child sat here, they're not going to be all hunched up with their feet on a lump in the middle. That makes it a much more usable space in the middle there. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is, well, that battery lease. And how does that actually work? Well, I've got some figures. I just thought if I share the figures with you, you can take those away, compare that to your car, and work out whether it's the right thing for you. So battery lease or battery rental on this car, if you were to do 4,500 miles a year, it's going to be £49 a month. And that goes up to, if you were going to do 10,500 miles a year, it's going to be £89 a month. So what I thought I'd do, because let's be honest, most people do up around 10,000 miles a year, probably a lot more for a lot of people, but let's work it out on that. So if I was to do 10,500 miles in a year, and I was to drive 70 miles per charge, that works out that over the course of that year, to do that mileage, I would have to do 150 charges. 150 charges at my current rate, which is about 13p per kilowatt hour, is £2.86 a charge. That works out at £429. The battery lease, 89 times 12 is £1,068. So if we take 1,068, add it to 429, we get £1,497. Divide that by 10,500 miles and it works out about 14p per mile to charge and to lease the battery for this car on 10,500 miles. I did a quick one. If you were only getting 60 miles per charge, it would work out at £1,568 for the year. So just to give you an idea, it's actually not that much different. So take that away, work that out against your figures, your current car, see if you can make any savings. For me, as I say, I'm not a massive fan of the battery lease, albeit I accept that for some people it works really well. I think if you drive higher mileage, it's probably better to own the battery. But of course, if you own the battery, you need to add on that cost to the car. And I think for this car, obviously, when this one came out, the battery own wasn't available. but it came later that year, you can probably add £4,000 or £5,000 on. Have a look for yourself about that in order to own the battery outright. But if this works for you with the battery lease, this is an absolute bargain, I think. And with the new Zoe coming out, I think it will get cheaper and cheaper as the months go on. So keep an eye on these on the second-hand market. I think they are definitely a car to watch. And that's it for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed it and learned something new about the Zoe. If you have, remember to like and share. If you're not doing so already, subscribe to the channel. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at EVOpinion. And if you want to support the channel, have a look at the Patreon link at the end. Till next time, you take care. All the best.